This week we're looking at the term Har Mageddon. It's in Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, and it is the sixth of the seven bowls of God's wrath that are poured out in that section of Revelation. To set the context, let's take a look at Revelation 16, verses 13 and 14 from the ESV. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, three unclean spirits like frogs, for they are demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. So we're told that three unclean spirits gather the kings, the powers of the world, to a specific place for a battle against God at the end. Then verse 15 tells believers to remain ready. And then we get to the verse in question for us today, verse 16, which says, "And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Har Mageddon." So let's take a look at the verse in Koine. Kai sunegagen autus. So kai is and, sunegagen is an aorist tense verb that is they gathered or they assembled. Who are they? They are the three unclean spirits that went out to gather the kings. And who did they gather? They gathered the kings, here referred to as autus, them. And they gathered them. Now we get to the important stuff for us. Ace ton topon. So ace is in, or into or unto. Here in this case it's probably just in. Ton topon, the place. Topography is a description or a representation of a place, of the landscape, right? The highs and lows, the hills and valleys. Topos is place. Here, ton topon in the accusative. In the place, ton kalumenon, this is a participle that is passive, being called. The place being called. Then we get this great word, Hebraisti, in Hebrew. So it's in the dative case, so it's two or four in Hebrew, Har Mageddon. The name of the place is Har Mageddon, and we're told that it is a Hebrew name. Notice in the word Hebraisti, we have the diacritical marks over the iota in the middle. This is telling us that the alpha and the iota are not forming a diphthong here, but need to be pronounced separately. So, so that's why we have those two dots over the iota. So what do we know so far? Three evil spirits, three unclean spirits go out and gather all the kings of the world into one place. What kind of a place? A place that has a Hebrew name, and that name is Har Mageddon. Notice, if we look at the word Har Mageddon, specifically in the Greek part, the Greek reference of it, it has a rough breathing mark in front of the alpha. So it's not Armageddon, it's Har Mageddon. It has an H sound in front of it. That's what the rough breathing mark signifies. And it is the Greek transliteration of a Hebrew name. How do we know it's a Hebrew name? Because he told us that the place being called in Hebrew Har Mageddon. That's the place where the three spirits gathered the kings of the world. So there's no dispute. All commenters agree that Har here is Hebrew for mount or mountain. Now, it's generally accepted, I should say, the majority position is that the second half of that word, the part after the Har, is a reference to Megiddo. And so what we're told is the place that the kings are being gathered is Mount Megiddo. There's only one problem with that. It's not really one problem, it's a couple of problems. The problems begin with that all the references to Megiddo in the Old Testament and in contemporary literature outside the Old Testament describe Megiddo as either a plain or a city on a plain. Nowhere is it ever described as a mountain. There are some old-timey commenters that reference a mountain that's, quote, nearby the city of Megiddo, across the plain, but the mountain in question is over 7 miles away. So if you're a fast walker, it would take you an hour and a half to walk from Megiddo to the mountain. I think it's pretty safe to say that 7 miles puts it outside the scope of being the place where they gathered them, right? So that's part of the problem. But I want to take a look at 2 quick verses just to show a couple of the Old Testament references to Megiddo. The first up is Zechariah chapter 12, verse 11. And it says there, "On that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad Ramon in the plain of Megiddo." So here it describes it as a plain, a large, open, flat area. The next one is in Joshua chapter 17, verse 11. And you'll notice I have it in ellipses. It's a lengthy verse with a lot of extraneous stuff that doesn't refer to Megiddo, but I'm just giving you the Megiddo part. Go back and look at Joshua 17:11 if you want to see the rest. "And the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages." So it's described as a city surrounded by smaller villages. That's not at all uncommon in that time and place. So if Har Mageddon is a transliteration of Har Megiddo, the passage doesn't comport with known geography. We don't have maps or other descriptions of a Mount Megiddo. That's problematic. But to be fair, apocalyptic literature frequently uses a Hebrew term and doesn't give an explanation of it. It doesn't tell us how we're supposed to interpret the term. So leaving it hanging is not outside the characteristic of apocalyptic literature. So it could be that Mount Megiddo is something to do with a mountain near the plain or city of Megiddo. Hard telling, not knowing. But what if it's not a transliteration of Megiddo, but a transliteration of something else? Specifically, the Hebrew word for assembly and the mount of assembly, or the mount of gathering. So if Har Mageddon is a terrible transliteration of the Hebrew phrase Har Moed, it could possibly be that that's what the reference is. Why do I say a terrible transliteration? I don't know where you are with your Hebrew, but remember these few short things. Hebrew is read from right to left, not left to right. And so if we look at the Hebrew phrase here, Har Moed, the second to the last letter is called a tsadeh. And a tsadeh is usually not pronounced, but makes a space for a vowel sound. And here, Har Moed has a tsadeh as the second to the last letter. And what we would be saying is that the writer of Revelation transliterated, if in fact it is Har Moed, transliterated the tsadeh as a gamma. And that we got, instead of Moed, Moged, Har Moged, Har Mageddon, right? So that's a possibility. The trouble here is that when you transliterate, if you look at the tsadeh and then if you look at the gamma, they both kind of look like they have horns, right? The trouble is when you transliterate, you don't transliterate for the forms of the letters, you transliterate for the sounds of the letters, because you want to phonetically convey what the word sounds like. So Har Moed to Har Moged is a big stretch. The only explanation, well, I shouldn't say only, but one of the explanations would be that the writer of Revelation has a much greater understanding of Greek than he does of Hebrew, because if he's fluent in Hebrew, he should know that the G sound in Hebrew is from the gimmel, not from the tsadeh. And this would be a transliteration based on shape, not on sound, which is not how you transliterate. But holding on to that notion, apocalyptic literature is about using imagery or symbolism to evoke a response, to get you to think about something that you already know and carry over some meaning from that. So if we take this term, Har Moed, the Mount of Assembly, and we think about prominent uses of that term in the Old Testament, there's one that really stands out and syncs up beautifully with the context of Revelation 16. And that's from Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 14. Listen to those verses from the ESV. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly, Har Moed, in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. So the Mount of Assembly, Har Moed, is a place in Isaiah where a rebel strives to make himself like God, in challenge to God and in opposition to God. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like the three unclean spirits gathering the kings of the earth and bringing them perhaps to the Mount of Assembly, a false Mount of Assembly, to stand in opposition to God and the genuine assembly, the assembly of the saints in the final conflict? That fits beautifully in the context. But it would be a very poor or at least weird transliteration from Har Moed to Har Moged to Har Mageddon in Revelation 16:16. But let's read that verse one more time. Revelation 16:16, and they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Har Mageddon. So we have two possible conclusions here from what we've looked at. Either Har Mageddon is a reference to an unheretofore named mountain that has kind of an oxymoron built into it, Mount Plain or Mount City on the Plain, Megiddo, or it's a weird transliteration of Har Moed, Mount of Assembly, representing that false assembly standing in opposition to God and the genuine assembly. But remember, apocalyptic literature uses imagery to evoke other things. It wants you to think about something that you know and apply it to this situation that you don't know or that is new to you or is just becoming known. In which case, it's not impossible for us to say that Har Moed, Mount of the Assembly, or Mount of Assembly, makes more sense than Har Megiddo, Mount City on the Plain. But we can't know conclusively. Here's one thing we can know conclusively. Never pronounce it Armageddon because it has a rough breathing mark in front of the alpha. It's Har Mageddon because in Hebrew, Har means mount. Not Ar, but Har. So going forward, let us all change the word from Armageddon to Har Mageddon to be consistent with the Hebrew in which it is rooted. So which one do you favor? Har Megiddo or Har Moed? It doesn't make much of a difference what I think, but I'm interested in what you think and how you would wrestle with this term and this strange transliteration from a Hebrew term into Greek, into English, and into our conversation today. Let me know in the comments what you think, which one you choose, and until next time, Charis Kai Reine Humin, grace and peace to you.